Hello! Wow, you just missed that. It was very loud in here a second ago. I'm just literally, okay, I just check when I need to check. How are you? We had a long break for the holiday, Thanksgiving, for the people that are watching in the United States. I hope yours was excellent. Mine was fine. Yeah, okay, buy the lunch boxes. They're great. Have you seen them? They're really good. HTTmerch.com. They're awesome. We have like more mugs, I think, available too. There's the holidays are coming up. You can support us that way. Patreon.com/healthcaretriage if you would like to support us that way. Let's get right to business because we've had some time. All right. Alex is peachy. Says, what are the risks of IUDs? So there's, some. No one should ever say that like anything has like no risk. It's just that, you have to weigh the risks against the benefits. So the risks of IUDs, one is that it can hurt to go in. Women that have had them put in will say that. It can be, problematic in the sense it can hurt to come out as well. It requires a procedure. It requires going into the doctor. All of those are sort of downsides. Theoretically, it can increase your risk of infection, although it is a very, very small risk. And if you have hormones, they can have side effects as well. If you use hormone IUDs, there are probably some things that I'm missing that are very rare, but the truth of the matter is, again, you're weighing the risk versus the benefits, and the risks are pretty low. Regardless, if you're thinking of having an IUD placed, you should talk to your physician so they can give you specific, risks that might apply to you, as well as benefits, and you can make an informed decision. For the most part, almost everybody I know who is involved in this area would say that the benefits of an IUD massively outweigh the risks for the vast majority of people. N Kicker asks, with SEMA Verma, local Indiana person, picked to head CMS, can you discuss Healthy Indiana programs? Specifically, I'm curious about having Medicaid recipients pay premiums or else being locked out of coverage. So, I think we did an episode on maybe we haven't. Maybe we should do an episode on HIP. But Healthy Indiana program was something started back with our last governor, Mitch Daniels. It was a way that they had expanded Medicaid before the ACA to make it look more like health savings accounts and sort of that high deductible healthcare plan. So what they would do is instead of giving people Medicaid, they opened up health savings accounts for them, and then they put money in the health savings account, and they asked people to do that. They also required people to make what we would consider minimal but still real contributions. And that's what HIP 2.0 does as well. So it sets up a Medicaid expansion program, but again, it does it by setting up health savings accounts for the poor people, and then putting money into those health savings accounts and then asking them to have high deductible healthcare plans coupled with these health savings accounts. But on a sliding scale, it also requires people to put in money every month in order to get the rest of what's being given to them. Now, the amount that we're asking people to put in is small when compared to how much healthcare costs. It can be zero for people at the very low end of the socioeconomic spectrum, moving all the way up to, I think, about $20 a month, if they reach sort of the upper limit of what we would think of for Medicaid. And people will argue, well, that's not that much money. We're just asking them to have some skin in the game. We're asking them to take responsibility. It's rugged individualism, blah, 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 blah. And I'm being facetious about this because there's no way that the $10 or so we're asking people to put in a month even touches what healthcare costs. It's an infinitesimal amount. So you could argue, well then, really, what difference does it make? Well, the difference it makes is that it actually does result in a significant number of people not getting insurance. Because while $10 may not seem like much money to me or perhaps to some of you, it is a huge amount of money to people who are really skirting the line or who are very poor. And so they often have to make choices about what they're going to spend their money on, and the $10 makes a difference, and they don't put it in, and then they lose all their health care. It is clearly not about offsetting the cost of care, because it really doesn't matter. It is more about some people don't get insurance because of a small amount of money. And when you meet these people, it is rarely that they're like, man, I wanted to spend it on video games or cell phones. It's like they had to decide whether to pay the rent or get health insurance. And unfortunately, as we've talked about in previous healthcare triage, barriers of access, barriers of cost, knowing that care costs too much is one of the biggest barriers that still exist. More than 1/3 of Americans have reported in previous years of avoiding care because of cost. And that's even when they have insurance. And this is a good example of that even after they have the insurance, when we put cost barriers in place, people don't take care. I wrote an upshot piece, and I can't remember if we turned it into healthcare triage. I want to say yes, but I'm not even positive. I'm talking specifically about this, about sort of using premiums for Medicaid and what are the pros and cons of it, where we talked about the numbers and the specific percentage of people who go without care because of these small incremental costs. You will hear people who say, oh, but it's American. It's pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It gives you, a sense of respect that you're contributing. That's not what you often hear from people who are truly down and strapped and out of luck. This is a real barrier to getting themselves care or getting other people care. And so we'll see what happens. Having said that, I'd rather have that than nothing. If that is the means by which we can get the Medicaid expansion into states where they refuse to take it at all, I'm fine. Because at the end of the day, I'm about access, cost, and quality. I would rather see significantly more people get care than get the plan of my choice. I know I'm not going to get my perfect perfection. I am still not king. I'm willing to take a HIP 2.0 Medicaid-like expansion for the country rather than see the Medicaid expansion not exist at all. So, are there better plans, do I believe? Probably. Would I take that over nothing? Absolutely. I have issues of Steve Slocum, I have issues of muscle cramps. Where do you tell me what a muscle cramp is? In my calves when exercising. I use compression sleeves, which usually work, but I'll still get them any other advice. I mean, I've heard anecdotally, people talk about potassium and other, you could have imbalances, but most people are not potassium deficient. So, unfortunately, other than the stuff you're already doing, I'm not sure. You should talk to your doctor. The facetious part of me will roll my eyes and go like, don't do the things that are giving you calves. Perhaps find another way to exercise for a period of time. Then go back to this and maybe things will be better. But if you want to do whatever you're doing and you're having problems, unfortunately, you really need to go to your doctor. There's not a lot of stuff that I can say there. Now, you follow that up immediately, I think, with, hey, can turmeric be used as an effective anti-inflammatory treatment? What does the research say? Randomized controlled trials, I think, do not support the use of, turmeric or something like this. So there's lots of good anti-inflammatories on the market. Ibuprofen is great and it works. Don't go crazy with it because you don't want to, use too much of it. But there are good anti-inflammatory drugs which we know do work in randomized controlled trials. I would likely try those first before I started trying to find some kind of food or supplement, which are all unregulated. And we've done so many videos on why supplements are problematic that I would not go that way first. Brian Hershey, I think I said that right. A teacher of mine mentioned some people are using extremely high doses of IV vitamin C to treat cancer. Any info on this claim? What does the research say about this treatment? Was your teacher saying it because he or she thought it was a good idea? Because there's no evidence for that. So vitamin C, man. I mean, all the way back to Linus Pauling, who's obviously very smart and won a Nobel Prize. Chemistry or physics? Physics? Probably physics. Maybe, I don't know. Regardless. But was a huge proponent of vitamin C to cure everything, and he was wrong. Wrong. There have been so many studies of vitamin C to do all kinds of stuff, and it doesn't. Well, you know what? Adequate amounts of vitamin C prevent scurvy. That works. Taking more than that does nothing. Your body is not prepped for more vitamins than what you need. It doesn't store them. It doesn't go crazy with them. It doesn't use them. You're just creating expensive urine. And so if you're vitamin C deficient, yes, by all means, consume or take vitamin C to get yourself up to the point where you need to be. But after that, all the vitamin C, it's not really doing anything. And there are not good studies that I know of that say that it helps with cancer. If there were, we'd all be doing it. Oncologists want to cure their patients. If something like vitamin C worked, we'd all do it. There's no rational reason for us not to. Dominic Toktakan. I worked with a doctor in ER who didn't know whether a patient had a PPO or an HMO based on their insurance card. Is it common for doctors not to know a lot about their patients' insurance plans? Oh, God, yes. I don't think I've ever known. I mean, I still work in pediatric clinic. I don't think I ever know what insurance my patients have. I don't treat them differently based upon that. I treat them based upon what I think is the best. Now, if they ask me, is that going to cost a lot of money, I will sometimes try to delve into it and try to figure out how much it's going to cost them out of pocket. But the truth of the matter is that, no, I don't think most people themselves know what insurance plans they have, even if they look at their card, let alone a doctor. So, I mean, unless it's branded PPO or HMO right on the card, and those aren't even the only two choices, there are other types of insurance plans, I don't think that they know. Nor do I think they would probably be treating them differently, especially in an emergency room. I mean, assume it's an emergency, they're going to take care of the patient. They're not going to start worrying about where they referred properly or everything else. So, no, I would say it's not common for doctors to know a lot about their patient's insurance plan. It just isn't. Dr. Carroll, have you had a chance to read the new study on artificial sweeteners from PLOS 1, whatever it is? Any thoughts? Yes, of course I've read the study. It is another observational study. We've seen many like this before, which show that over a period of time, if you're just looking at associations, that people who consume artificial sweeteners tend to be heavier than people who do not. And those will always be taken by people who want to say, oh my God, that proves that artificial sweeteners cause obesity and overweight. This is an observational study. Observational studies can detect association, not causation. It is equally as likely, if not more, than being overweight causes people to consume artificial sweeteners. Because of course, people who are overweight say, maybe I should drink Diet Coke instead of Coke because that's what my doctor told me to do. Now, of course, it's very hard to change a lot of other things in your diet, but it is not crazy to find that overweight people tend to be more likely to consume artificial sweeteners than non-overweight people. Because that makes total sense. That can happen. What we need are prospective, randomized, controlled trials. We have them. They exist. Go read my pieces on artificial sweeteners. Go watch the healthcare triage we've done on them. Buy my upcoming book. It'll be out next November where I have a whole chapter on artificial sweeteners. We'll talk more about that later. But regardless, there are randomized controlled trials, and the randomized controlled trials that do exist and the meta-analyses of those randomized controlled trials say that in general, if you take people and you swap out artificial sweeteners for the sugar-sweetened beverages, like if you do that, people tend to lose weight. They don't gain weight. They lose about 1 pound or 2 on average. Do I think that that's a thing that we should be screaming from the rooftops? No, it's not that big a deal. It's a small change, but they don't gain weight. And so when you have randomized controlled trials, when you have prospective trials which show that when those are the ones that show causality, that show, hey, when we do this and we randomize and we blind, people lose weight on artificial sweeteners, it's then ridiculous to keep doing massive observational trials which keep showing us associations in the other direction. We know they exist. They exist. To keep doing those observational studies, ignoring the randomized controlled trials, and then making proclamations that, oh, artificial. No, I also agree that to say that artificial sweeteners are a panacea and that they're the secret. No, there's no evidence for that either. I'm in no way saying like, oh, we know artificial sweeteners will make you lose weight. We don't. But we know that the randomized controlled trials tend to show us that they don't really make you gain weight, and if anything, it leans towards losing weight. So that's where it is. This is another observational trial. It is another cohort study. We've seen these before. I know that they exist, and every single time one comes out, we do this again and again and again and again and again. So we should box that up, what I just said. We can just replay it every single time one of these studies appears. By the way, and you often will always see like news stories again, which do exactly what I just said. They will take this, they'll start interviewing experts, they'll talk about how maybe artificial sweeteners cause us to gain weight. The studies that do exist again are like rat studies. They talk about the microbiome. They talk about insulin sensitivity for like a week or two. They talk about stuff. They don't talk about weight gain in humans in the long haul or diabetes or anything like that. And the randomized controlled trials that we do have tend to show the opposite. All right. Terrence Foster asks, what are your thoughts on radioembolization to treat tumors of the liver? Yeah, I'm not sure like how much I know about that. So I assume that I don't know. I'm just going to stop right there. I don't know. If you're asking because you have tumors in the liver, you should talk to your doctor. But I don't actually know what the evidence and the data are for that. I can try to look it up. Remind me. Tweet me later. David Devine, if diet is the key to weight loss, as you pointed out, heavy exercise is not. Aside from assigning a diet you can stick to, are there any other factors to focus on? Fiber, food, water content, etc. Well, we've done episodes on this before, which I also recommend that you go watch, but we even did a whole episode on sort of my food recommendations, which will also be in my upcoming book. So, if we're recapping in general, one is like, look, I tend to, say that people should try to avoid processed foods. Not because I think there's any danger in food companies or anything like that, but because processed foods tend to make it easier for you to cram stuff into you that you don't really want or need. And I don't even mean poisons or toxins or anything like that. But, it's easier to eat bread than wheat. It is easier to eat pasta than it is to, when you've got all that stuff made, it's easier to eat, something that's been cooked and changed, and so therefore you wind up eating more than you need. If you go to a restaurant, the same rules apply. You know what's in a baked potato. You don't really know necessarily what's in that potato souffle with some kind of cream sauce. That's just sometimes, it just gets too easy. So I tend to try to stick to unprocessed foods, and then you can eat some low processed, lightly processed foods, but less than the processed foods. And you're going to eat some heavily processed foods, but make that least of all. I don't panic about nutrients or is it carbs, is it how many calories, or this or that, because the truth of the matter is if you're trying to eat mostly stuff that's not been processed or to make your own food, it gets harder and harder to get too much into you. Cookies are an amazingly efficient way to cram yourself full of calories and all kinds of other stuff. But, making your own lunch is not. It gets much harder. So, heavily processed, starchy desserts and stuff, and even when you're talking about meats, processed meats, and you shrink it, and it gets so easy. So, pick a diet, a way of eating that works for you. If that means going with a Weight Watchers plan, so be it. I'm fine with that. You want to go with Atkins? That'll work too. Jenny Craig. I don't know, pick it, doesn't matter. As we've done, I think we even did a whole one on this, there have been big trials which show that almost all diets work. It's just you got to find something and stick to it. Anything that sort of makes you focus, be mindful of your eating, and does that tends to make you lose weight. The problem is that people don't stick to them. So that's why with the food recommendations, we've tried to take more of a philosophy and not necessarily, you go all the way back to Michael Pollan. What was that? It was like eat food, mostly plants. Is that it? Eat food, what was it? I can't remember, but it was totally simple, but I tend not to get into these, should have 45% of this, 35% of this, 20% of this, or that, don't eat any of this, don't eat any of that. That doesn't really work. But I think if you try to stick to try cooking for yourself more, try not to use processed stuff, I think you'll probably do much better. Beatrice RZM, healthcare, blah, blah, blah. Hi, I'm from Mexico, and I don't get why the ACA is so divisive. Who or what does it damage? It is not communist at all. Yeah, tell that to America. It's political. Some people have philosophical differences, but even when you get down to it, it's not that they have philosophical differences with the idea of it. They don't like how the ACA was implemented. They'll be like, oh, well, we're fine with this and that, but we don't want this, or I don't know. But I would say it's very political. Because, when we look 20 years ago, remember that a lot of what is behind the ACA was a conservative alternative to what was being proposed by Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton at the same time. And now it's this or that. There have been conservative people that would just pushed, more single payer systems. So it's divisive probably because politics is divisive in the United States at this point. And therefore it has become, in my personal opinion, somewhat of a litmus test for which team you're on. And we will see what happens. We'll probably be doing many episodes in the future about ACA replacement plans, what might actually happen. I'm sure we're going to be writing and talking about this a lot. Aaron W., can you please explain how losing weight eases GERD symptoms? So a lot of that is just has to do with probably pressure. Remember that, when you have GERD is gastroesophageal reflux disease, you're having stomach acid basically come up into your esophagus. A lot of that can be just abdominal pressure. The more pressure is in your stomach, the more you're regurgitating stuff back out. So often people who lose weight see a lowering of their symptoms. I would imagine a lot of that is abdominal pressure. They might have something to do with lower esophageal sphincter tone as well. But I bet most of it is pressure. Forlos comments, what measures should people living in the developed world take to help prevent the incidence of immunoinflammatory disease? I need a specific disease. I think part of this is I feel like you're falling into the trap where everybody thinks that inflammation is the new panic du jour. It's the key to everything. It's what causes all disease. And then they get into, oh my God, we're eating gluten, and gluten is causing inflammation, and blah, 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 blah. That there's no evidence for all of that. There's not good real data. And so if you're asking me about a specific immunoinflammatory disease, say ulcerative colitis, I'd be like, there's not much you can do to prevent it. Same thing with a Crohn's. If you're asking me about arthritis, I don't really, there's not much. But if you're thinking of a specific disease where there is something you could do to prevent it, ask me that question. That we could probably talk about in more detail. Sarah Grady, is it really bad for your throat to swallow pills without water or some kind of liquid? I always gag on pills if I just don't put them in the back of my tongue and swallow without any liquid. I take pills every morning and I don't use liquid most of the time. If you gag when you do use water, don't use water. If you gag when you don't, if you do use water, don't use water. You know, what's the downside? Well, sometimes if you don't swallow them fast enough, they start to melt and they taste like crap. That's why sometimes people use water. Sometimes they get stuck. I suppose they could scratch you, theoretically, but not that would cause long-term damage or be a problem. If you can swallow them, you can swallow them. If you can't, you should do liquids. Sometimes pills need to be taken with drink or food because that's how they're absorbed, or taking them with or without food is a big problem, or you need to do it on a full stomach, so that would be different. Like if they give you specific instructions about you got to take this with a meal, you should do it. If they say specific instructions like don't take this with that kind of beverage, don't do that. But just in general, I think you can do whatever you want. Zach Stellan, are there any studies on the effects of listening to music and doing homework or work? Does it help or harm concentration? What an interesting question. So I'm going to say that I have to believe it probably hurts concentration in the sense that, like, how could it not? It's like, but it does help. Some people have gotten so used to working with the distraction that they think that they perform more effectively. Now, I wouldn't call that concentration. I would say perhaps a more effective work style. I work with TV on at work all the time. I have since I was a kid. I have a N of one anecdote where I think that's my like sort of high functioning ADD or whatever that is. Like that the minor distraction keeps me like distracted enough that I can get whatever I want done. Otherwise, I have a harder time. But I don't know. That was always my theory. And maybe that I'm just used to it. But I also find that when I have to really concentrate on what I'm doing, when it's not just I'm trying to get stuff done, but like, okay, this is complicated and I really need to pay attention, I turn the TV off because I feel like it disrupts my pure concentration. It's just if I'm doing activities that I know what to do and I'm trying to get through them, I find that having the noise is helpful. I don't know that we've done like randomized controlled trials. I would say that probably it's a stylistic thing where some people like it, some people don't, some people find it acceptable, some people don't. It's not going to be something I think that I could say data and that this will work the same way for everyone. Simon Deemert, what's my opinion on electronic medical record systems? We have to have done episodes on EMRs. God, I feel like we have to. Anyway, that's like asking me like, what's my opinion on music? I think there's good music and bad music. What's my opinion on electronic? I think there are some great EMRs. I think there's some terrible EMRs. I think the data show they're one of the biggest problems for people who practice medicine, that it causes more unhappiness than almost anything else amongst physicians, that they're the biggest source for professional dissatisfaction in their jobs. I think that the evidence doesn't show that they are the silver bullet for the healthcare system that many people think they are, that they don't result in reduced spending, that they don't result in increased efficiency all the time, that they don't necessarily result in improved quality. There's tons of research that shows sometimes that all of that backfires. But of course, all EMRs are not the same. Some are good and some are bad. There are things about some of the EMRs I use that I like. There are some things I loathe. And I say this having spent most of my professional career working in information technology and healthcare. Most of my grants are in using EHRs and clinical decision support to improve care. And I think it's great. I also think it fails a lot of the time, and I think we do it inefficiently, and I think that it could be much better. I have written tons on this, and I encourage you to go to our blog and type in like EMRs or EHRs, and you will get lots of my opinions on them. Let's do a couple more questions for out of time. Lindsay Carbonneau, have there been any comprehensive meta-analyses on nutritional science studies? There are so many different stories being reported and the actual results are hard to find or understand. Yeah, we talk about them on Healthcare Triage. I've written about them at the New York Times. There'll be a book next November, whole book full of nutrition study stuff. So yes, but they're on specific things, so it depends what you're asking me. I know we covered there was a study not long ago. It was a honey study where they looked at a randomized controlled trial of like honey versus high fructose corn syrup versus I want to say sugar artificial sweetener. I can't remember what it was, but regardless, it was like it didn't show honey was that great. It was sponsored by the Honey Board or something, so sucks for them. But then we talked about the fact that there's even been randomized meta-analyses of RCTs of different kinds of sweeteners like that. Problem is that like almost all of them are still like flawed. They're incredibly short term. They look at process, measures, not necessarily outcomes. They're always in small numbers of people. But there have been lots of meta-analyses and lots of randomized controlled trials in nutrition. Not as many as I like, but lots. And we've discussed many of them on healthcare triage with respect to cardiovascular change, with respect to salt, with respect to fats, cholesterol. You should go look those up. There's lots of them. On the other hand, has anyone gathered these together well and discussed them? I don't know, but please buy my book. That's what the book will be about. But again, next November, I'm sure we'll have lots of time to talk about that. I'm talking about the book a lot because literally it's due tomorrow. Due tomorrow. So I've done, the last weeks have been a mad rush. And, I'm sitting here, I'm doing Healthcare Triage Live, and my book is due tomorrow. That's how much I love you. X-Core, what do you think is the most widespread or worst health myth that people should stop believing? I'll go with vaccines and autism. That's the one I think if you had to pick one, that's the one that I wish everyone would just get over and move past. Vaccines are just such an unequivocal good. And the fact that we're still doing this and we're still wasting money studying it, it's like drives me crazy. I think it's not as lighthearted perhaps as many of the other myths. I mean, I could talk about like turkey making you sleepy. That bothers me, but it's not that important in the scheme of life. Vaccines and autism are. And that one is serious. And there was still a study even like this month looking at whether moms getting the influenza vaccine would increase the risk of autism in their baby. And it's like, really? We're still doing this? There's like no causal pathway that anyone can describe to me, but we're still doing it. Regardless, that's the one. That's the one. Last question. Acrophobic pixie. What do you do when a patient has symptoms and neurological testing says, yes, there's physical evidence of this, but you've tested for both horses and zebras and nothing comes back conclusive? And I assume when you say horses and zebras, you mean common things and uncommon things, not literally horses and zebras. So you've got symptoms and neurological, well, I mean, at that point, it depends what the symptoms are. That's when sometimes you wind up with a diagnosis like fibromyalgia. If it's pain, that's when you wind up with a diagnosis of like reflex neurological dystrophy. If it's pain, you can wind up with chronic fatigue. If it's being super tired. So it's like when we can't figure it out, but it still falls into a bucket that we can talk about. And all the neurologic testing says it's not something specific. Just because we can't test and put a name on it doesn't mean that you're not having symptoms. At that point, we have to then treat the symptoms or try to figure out what it is. It is important at that point, and this is when people get very touchy, to recognize that everything has a mental and physical cause, that both those things are important. And as we rule out more and more of the physical things, then sometimes we have to talk about the mental health issues. Now, people will take what I just said to mean that I'm saying you're faking it or it's all in your head. You got to stop with that. People who are depressed are incredibly tired and have a hard time getting out of bed. That is real. I'm not denying it. But we fix that by fixing the depression, not by giving them pet pills. Or by trying to find, people who have, get incredibly nervous and wind up vomiting or have panic attacks are having real symptoms, but I don't treat their GI, I have to treat the mental health, because mental health can sometimes even lead to physical problems. And so when we keep ruling out physical things, it's important to also start considering the mental things. I don't know any more than what you've given me, but I don't know about the symptoms and I don't know about the neurologic testing that's been done, but I would say that as they've ruled out most of the things for which we have proven medical therapies, then we have to start talking about symptomatic care and mental health. And that is often what happens. And that's a great place to start. Thank you so much for, stop, not start. Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you can, the holidays, support us at Healthcare Triage. Make us a gift at patreon.com/healthcaretriage. Healthcare Triage. Buy gifts for other people at hctmerch.com. Check us out. Watch our videos. We got videos. We'll have Healthcare Triage news on Friday, which we just taped. You can see I'll be wearing this shirt. We will have new Healthcare Triage on Monday. We are still filming videos all the way through the holiday season and into next year and beyond. There may be a new presidential administration and world come January, but Healthcare Triage will still be here, and we will still be talking about health and health research and health policy, and we hope you'll continue to join us. Thanks. See you next week.